She's a little older than me now. She's extremely active. Yeah, okay. And we go way back with July 26th, and using so many events. Beautiful with David Olson, and I'm glad.
Okay, can we officially get this party started?
Yes.
So do you stay muted?
Welcome to Community Church of Boston, folks. So glad to have you with us. We call ourselves a Peace and Justice congregation since 1920, and don't let that burn out. Yes. And our flame is burning bright after 103 years. January 10th, 1920 was the first service. And here we are still. We have a rich history, which we will really celebrate today. This day is a walk through memory lane, and beautiful memory lane, and we're looking forward to it. And we're doing this despite the fact that this is the high holiday for America's real religion, football. I want to tell you that if you look on our YouTube channel, you can find a beautiful talk from Bill Littlefield. It was maybe 5 years ago, and he spoke, he pondered the question, why is football so big in the United States and nowhere else? It's a really interesting question.
But football's called soccer.
We're just sending out our best wishes to our friends in Philadelphia and Kansas City, and we're talking about something completely else here today. I light this candle for my uncle. He passed away last Wednesday. His name was David Stam. Beautiful man, beautiful career. He was a head librarian for many years at Syracuse University and had a marvelous career of library directorship that included the New York Public Library, the Newberry Library in Chicago, and several college libraries. Funny guy, lived with ALS for 20 years and did it with just incredible dignity and poise and elegance, and shook his fist at death like you wouldn't believe, and funny, and just, I remember my Uncle David Stam, who died immediately in the aftermath of the death of my Aunt Mary in Colorado Springs. We had her memorial yesterday. I watched it on Zoom, and a bunch of my family, friends, and folk were there. So here's to my uncle and aunt, and we remember you. Today, we also celebrate the music of Carolyn McDade. Some of her friends, I'm sure, are joining us on the Zoom. And we just remember her because she took a huge part in what we are talking about today, the sanctuary movement of the early 80s that was pioneered by Community Church of Boston. So we're going to start with Susie Giroux and my favorite song by Carolyn. Will you welcome Susie, longtime member and the beautiful voice of Community Church. Here we go.
Good morning. Those.
So what shall we say about Carolyn McDade? She was on the board here. She was the director of the Sanctuary Committee. She has 3 songs that are in the Unitarian Universalist hymnal. including this one that we love, and Susie and I have played it many, many times.
And I think, I could be wrong about this, but I think I remember that she wrote this song for inmates, women inmates at one of the prisons here in Massachusetts.
Wow.
Okay.
Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. And a rose in the winter time. Beautiful, Susie. Thank you.
Thank you.
And what Carolyn had published in the Unitarian Universalist Hymn Book, and which I hear is sung frequently at other churches like Old South right here, Ed informs me, is just the tip of the iceberg, or just a tiny sample of Carolyn's music. And this has been a journey of discovery for me about Carolyn. You go on YouTube, you can find all kinds of stuff that Carolyn recorded over the years. Her music at that time was very folky sounding, guitar and voice, and then it branched out into something completely different, which is her vehicle was women's chorus, women's choirs, and she for many years gathered women's singing reunions, and there's several recordings of just women's choir. She was a early feminist, early voice in the women's music movement, which flourished in the late 70s around the struggle for the ERA. And Carolyn McDade, worth finding more out. And I hope that Sunny Robinson will be able to talk to us more if she's with us on the Zoom later on. But anyway, welcome. And maybe near the Cape. Plainfield. Yeah. And for a while, she lived in the West Coast, in Oregon, if I'm not mistaken. And I was hoping that she would be able to join us with her daughter, who would have helped her get on the Zoom platform. She lives right near the Cape Cod Canal on that side, on the mainland side of the Cape. We will make contact with Carolyn. They weren't able to, Carolyn's daughter had a conflict. Sonny,
Yeah.
you're with us. Would you like to sing the praises of Carolyn McDade for us? Good morning, Sonny.
And Jean Gallo.
And Jean
are
Gallo.
both here, right?
Our
So,
beloveds up in Gloucester. Thank you for being with us this morning, to both of you.
Well, Carolyn is very special to us.
and I would add to the things that you said, Dean, that there was a whole period of time when very much of Carolyn's music was international, focused on women's efforts in Central America, but also in Africa. And then she went on to a third phase of her music in terms of really being involved in environmental struggles. And the women's singing groups that you mentioned are still meeting in a number of places in North America, both in the United States and in Canada. And we gather every couple of months on Zoom and continue to have a sing-along with Carolyn as she is living in the Royal Cape Cod Nursing Facility in Buzzards Bay. Unfortunately, Women's Center at Plainville is no longer, and the property which then transformed on into Silver Springs has now been sold as conservation land. So the 40 years of all of the 50 years of all of that work in and around the greater Boston area now resides in the multitude of Carolyn's CDs, which are still available.
And her early records were on, her early taping in the 80s was on Central America, because she went to Nicaragua with me for the first time in 1981.
1981. This is how far back it goes. And Jean, of course, spoke a number of times at Community Church and talked about Central America and women's issues. And it's just so great to have you both here with us, although down a phone line. I'll mention to folks that I have been in touch with Marion Shadow, who runs a website and fulfills orders for Carolyn's music, whatever is available. And I just sent her a check saying, send us whatever you've got, and it'll be in Community Church's library if you're interested in hearing more of her music, and hopefully we'll be able to incorporate more of it in the future. Just because it's such an important part of our history. And we're looking at that particular moment of the Community Church's history this morning. And a rich one it is. At that point, we were meeting in Morse Auditorium, Boston University campus. And it's really an amazing thing that we have our archives that are spread out all over the entire 5th floor of our building. We had a tenant who moved out about 2.5 years ago, and there was enough work had to be done on that floor that we did not seek out another tenant, and we decided to lay out all of our archives all over the entire span of the 5th floor. I'd be glad to give you a tour of the archives anytime. We especially have open house on Wednesdays, and at noon we have pupusas and open house, and have several things to show you, not just our own 102 years worth of archives 40 years worth of cassettes of speakers from the late 70s all the way into deep into the 2000s. We have some old reel-to-reels. We have a yearbook for every year. Just to tell you about this, I'll show you one. This one is 1984, 1985. And I brought 4 of them down because these are the years that the sanctuary movement was active here. And this is full of things about sanctuary, and just happened to just be collecting everything in addition to the yearbooks that was about sanctuary, and I piled them in a pile. And a certain Rady Roldán got very interested in the sanctuary movement and how it relates to sanctuary today, and came and did a bunch of research, and that's what we're going to hear more about today. But there's about 90 years worth of these yearbooks up there, and there's incredible amount of correspondence, publications, minutes of board meetings, press clippings. It used to be that we were all over every newspaper in the city of Boston because it was a huge gathering that happened every Sunday morning. It might be 2,000 people come to hear W.E.B. Du Bois or Robert Frost or John Haynes Holmes, one of the founders, who would come up once a month from Community Church of New York and would give a talk, and it was very popular. So that's just a little bit, just a little taste to invite you to get involved in finding out about this treasure that we have up there. The 4th floor has a new treasure. I'm not familiar with it, but it's our new tenant. It's called the History Project. History Project, and I want to thank Ed Pazanese for being the first person to bring the History Project to our attention. It was just Ed's suggestion that we have them for a Sunday talk that led to their moving in. And they now occupy an office on our 4th floor. The History Project documents, preserves, and archives Boston's LGBT history. And they're a wonderful new addition to our building. The 3rd floor, we're going from top to bottom, has all of the inheritance of Bob Datilio, scholar of the Sacco Vanzetti case, which is something that is deep in our DNA from the outset of the church in 1920 when the case happened, all the way to now when we give out a annual Sacco and Vanzetti Award. That this past 22 went to the Holy Land Foundation 5. Find out more about them, look them up. You can also find information about them here. We have a book that's written by Miko Peled that we have for sale. It's called Injustice, the Story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. And other things that have stemmed from our featuring the Holy Land Foundation 5 and the talk by Miko Peled and the talk by one of the Holy Land people's daughters, her name Nida Abu Bakr, who was with us and spoke about her dad, who's serving 65 years in a federal prison for basically doing good charity work for Gaza and the West Bank. That's the 3rd floor. I was talking about the 3rd floor. Sorry, I got distracted. The Sacco and Vanzetti, there we have an enormous archive of primary source material about Sacco and Vanzetti. Bob Datilio, who passed away two and a half years ago, was a scholar of the Sacco Vanzetti case and collected an enormous amount of materials. That we have a beautiful man named Jerry Kaplan, who is retired from Harvard University Press, who is curating and organizing all of those materials. We also have a mountain of books that Bob bequeathed, isn't that a great word, to us? And we also have the same down here in the auditorium. Lots of books that we're trying to figure out what to do with. They're for sale for whatever price you want to pay. And some of them are going out to different places. An Italian bookstore has received several boxes of books in Italian. A dance nonprofit in New York has received about 8 boxes of books about ballet and modern dance and dance. So that's what's happening to our books. How about a little reading and then a song? A reading that leads into a song. This is the lyrics of Carolyn McDade. This is called Song of a River. There's a river that flows through the land of our peoples. It floods the plains of body and soul. It is deeper than deep and wider than wide. It waters the banks where the green trees hold. It's such a song, but I don't know the melody. It carries the waters that tumble down mountains, falling from ledges, sighing over plains. It hums through the roots of the Cottonwood Valley, a witness to life through the memory of rain. Chorus, and a river will change, a river will change. A river will change its course to run true. It once flowed a continent shining with islands, valleys and forests, desert and shoal. Prairies spread from the spine rock of mountains, people and land living balanced and whole. Then to its song came a deep lamentation, a loss and terror by conquering hand. A river won't lie of sorrow it carries, the fate of the people, the fate of the land. It sings of slavery and freedom's uprising, the killing of witches and silencing more. It tells of the power of rape, coin, and weapons, owning what never had been owned before. It sings the coming of desperate indentured, the clashing of cultures, the breaking of truce. It sings of insolence during daring survival, of dignity greater than all the abuse. It gathers the waters of many directions and sings to the people, restoring the whole. Go deeper than deep, go wider than wide, and water the banks where the green trees hold. For a people can change, a people can change, a people can change their course to run true. A nation can change, a nation can change, a nation can change its course to run true. We the people can change our course to run true. Carolyn McDade. So let's sing another song.
This is the one I take the one.
This is spirit or
Yeah,
real?
spirit, yeah.
Spirit.
So this is an A.
Yes.
Spirit of life, come unto me.
Sing
in my heart
all the stirrings of compassion, blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the land, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the land,
giving life the shape of justice.
Roots hold me set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Susie. That song is kind of like the doxology to a lot of churches, kind of like a little thing that they sing repeatedly. So sometime I want to give a little talk about community churches' doxologies. They had this little thing that was in every program with set lyrics and set tune. I don't know what the tune was though. It was kind of like which has all these different tunes that could like Amazing Grace or House of the Rising Sun. I think that's the one they used, House of the Rising Sun. That's community church, House of the Rising Sun, right? Or there's the one that I sang in evangelical prep school, which is, our God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. It's the same rhyme scheme. Sounds like a horse track, doesn't it? But the text evolved over time, and it's interesting the way they changed the words to sort of move with the times. Anyway, another little snippet from the archives of Community Church of Boston, which we're going to be celebrating this morning. Rady Roldán is with us, and Rady is a professor of theology at Boston University. And I don't want to dwell on his credentials. I just want to dwell on the fact that he took an interest in community church and has poured deep into some of our archives, studying this phenomenon of sanctuary, this phenomenon that happened in the 80s and that happened again during the Trump administration when ICE was out all over everywhere. And what I know most about was the most insidious thing, which is that they were on the courthouse steps at 9 a.m., just looking for people who were coming in to pay a parking ticket or to take out a restraining order. And they were just waiting on those steps where I work occasionally, and grabbing people and deporting them if they didn't have the correct papers. That's thankfully not happening anymore. But I don't know if you all remember this case, this judge named Cheryl Joseph in Newton District Court, who knew that was going on in the front steps of her courthouse and let a guy out the back door and got fired for it and got indicted in federal court. I don't know the status of that case, but about a year ago, I was in touch. I found out her attorney's name and was in touch with her and sort of told her, we think that's a badge of honor, not a reason to indict somebody. Could we have some contact with her, or is there anything we could do to help? Could we go picket in front of the courthouse? All the things that we do. And the attorney's response was just lay low. We're working on this, and so maybe someday we'll get to meet Cheryl Joseph and hear her version of what happened. But I had been in front of her a number of times, and that's what happened. So I'm getting really carried away. Mostly, I just wanted to thank Rady for joining us this morning and introduce him and welcome him to our humble pulpit. Rady Roldán.
Thank you very much for the introduction and all of that. Yeah. So it is a real honor for me to be here with you today. My name is Rady Roldán Figueroa, and I'm original from Puerto Rico, born in Brooklyn. And my wife and I have been living here in Massachusetts now for over 20 years. There was a period of time during that time when we lived in Texas, but we returned to Massachusetts. And I began doing research with Dr. Daryl Ireland at Boston University on the sanctuary movement around the year 2017. And I think we have a slide presentation that you may be able to follow on that screen, and also that you can follow over Zoom. And in the very first slide, you will see a description basically of the people who have been working on this and the kind of work that we have done. So here it mentions we began in 2015. So it talks about 1,000 images that we have digitized, but actually it's over that by now. We're close to 2,000 images of documents, of archival documents. So what we did is that in 2015 at Boston University, we began with a seminar, a travel seminar that was coordinated by one of our students who is from Arizona. And she at the time was an activist in the new sanctuary movement. And she took a number of students to the border. Very good. And they, so this travel sanctuary went to the border. And during that time, our student, who is Laura Rambicure, you can see her name right there in the presentation. Laura brought with her a small file of documents from the Arizona Task Force of the Sanctuary Movement from the 1980s. And we had a conversation in my office, and I said, okay, why don't we start doing a kind of history of the Sanctuary Movement in New England? And that's how we began in 2015. And our first place that we did work was here at Community Church of Boston. But since then, we also did a research at Old Cambridge Baptist Church, at Havrat Shalom. We did also scanning at Christ Church up in Burlington, and at the Benedictine Monastery in Vermont too. I'm going to talk more about this. So overall, we're close to 2,000 images of archival documents. In some cases, the archives we consider to be very fragile and vulnerable. When I came here, that was before that 5th floor was dedicated to the archives. The archives were in good shape. I mean, the 5th floor is better than the basement, way better. But still, the amount of archival material that Community Church of Boston has is just amazing. It's very significant. So that's an overview of the project. The last time I did some scanning was summer, fall of 2019. At that time, I was working with the materials of Havurat Shalom. I was not able to finish that. Came spring 2020, and we had the pandemic. But that summer of 2019, I also received a donation of documents from the New Jewish Agenda, who in the 1980s, they had a sanctuary task force. And we received a donation of all those documents. It was very interesting because the owner of the documents felt a kind of affirm. He kept this box of documents, reivindicated is the word. He kept this box of documents in the garage, and his wife many times asked him to throw the documents away, and he didn't. And this day I was in his living room or in their living room, and he came with the box and said, this is the moment. I was waiting for this moment. And he donated all the documents. And so we have those documents. But, you know, for the people who are on Zoom, if you have anything available related to the sanctuary movement, we are very interested. It turns out, very sadly, that Centro Presente, who was a group that began in the basement of Old Cambridge Baptist Church, Central American organization. Around this time, I think it was 2018, after many tries of getting in touch with the executive director, I reached her and I told her what we were doing. And she said, well, fortunately, we needed that room, and everything that was in that room, we just threw away. And so, so all the documents, they may still have some, but a large amount of the documents related to the Centro Presente and the Sanctuary movement and the history of Centro Presente may be lost for good. I also had a conversation now in December with the Quaker meeting in Hartford, Connecticut, and I'm going there to follow up, but I made the same request because some of their minutes are available. The Quakers deposit their minutes and their documents at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. So they do. It seems that they do that on a regular basis. So some of the minutes are there, but there are other documents, flyers, and so on that may not be there. So we began a conversation about that in December. Let me just sum up this part. So because of the pandemic, we had to stop the project. And then it was last year when we decided to get everything again together. In the fall of 2019, we did a small conference in which we invited activists of the first sanctuary movement of the 1980s and activists of the new sanctuary movement. And we had this conference at Boston University. It was an all afternoon program. I think that Dean was there. And I read a paper, a version of this paper at that point about Community Church of Boston. So now we're back to the project, bringing everything together. And one thing that I wanted to do was reach out to the communities like you and come here, talk about the project, read the paper so I can get feedback. So this for me is a different way of doing scholarship. Usually we just go to the archive and then go to our office and write about it. Here we have the opportunity of talking to the activists, people who were part of this. And I'm really asking for your help, for your memory, because there are things that that you know better than I do in many, many ways. So it's what I call a form of community engaged theological research. We're really in a partnership here. It is not my story, it is your story. It is the story of the Central American activists. I'm just interested in it, and I really dread the idea that the story will be lost. So that's why I'm here today. So what I'm going to do is read a paper to you, and please, you know, if you hear something, write it down, and later on, feel free to ask your questions or make your comments, because really this is what I'm here for. And then I also have a short PowerPoint presentation with some images. Okay, very good. And again, thank you for the invitation. When I reached out to Dean Stevens because I wanted to do this part here, and so I'm very grateful for the invitation. So I will start reading. The first sanctuary movement was a response of religious communities in the United States to the 1980s refugee crisis that resulted from the international displacement of thousands of non-combatant civilians from Central America. As it developed over the progression of the decade, different confessional and religious segments of the movement endeavored to explain the theological underpinnings of the notion and practice of sanctuary. In general, the claims of the movement challenged territorial conceptions of the modern nation state by questioning the authority of the state to determine who can legally cross its territorial boundaries, as well as who can remain within them. Indeed, the first sanctuary movement, which began in Arizona in 1982, sought to accomplish a twofold objective. Activists in the sanctuary movement intended to change U.S. foreign policy towards Central America. In addition, they aspired to change U.S. immigration policy. In the area of immigration, the sanctuary movement specifically challenged the political process that governed the admissions of refugees to the country, as well as the level of protection granted or denied to people seeking asylum in the US. Sanctuary activists contended that immigration policy, especially policy towards refugees, was used as a tool of US international relations. In the context of the Cold War, it meant that internationally displaced people from the Soviet Union or countries aligned with the Soviet Union were treated more favorably by the United States. In contrast, equally endangered people from countries governed by regimes aligned with the US did not receive that same treatment. I'm sorry, governed by regimes not aligned with the US did not receive the same treatment. The first sanctuary movement has alternatively been interpreted as a continuation of the American civil rights movement, or as a continuation of the Vietnam era anti-war movement, or both. Robert Serborough interpreted the movement as a continuation of the cultural protests that flourished in the Cambridge-Boston area in the 1960s and 70s, especially in reaction to the war in Vietnam. However, it's probably more accurate to see the germination of the sanctuary movement in New England as a result of a combination of several factors, including the culture of protest that crystallized in the preceding decades. Other factors include the mobilization of people of faith that responded to the plight of Central American refugees in light of their own religious traditions. That is, communities of faith in the greater Boston area and in New England opened up their sanctuaries and supported Central American refugees because they saw such actions as consistent with their own religious traditions. Just a comment here. One of the things that I have seen in the archive of material is how you have a different overlap of movements of people who were activists in other parts. And I remember having conversations with Dean Stevens, who has an amazing memory. And he making reference to some people who were part of the sanctuary movement here in Community Church of Boston, who were also anti-taxation activists. Is that the right name for them? Tax resistance, yes. And so that is an important note, that kind of overlap. And in the documents or archives of the Benedictine Brothers up in Vermont, another aspect is the that at that point there was a strong anti-proliferation movement in New England, and many of the people who were activists in the anti-proliferation movement migrated or also became activists in the sanctuary movement. So that's very interesting. And I don't know, but I suspect that it's very unique to New England. The sanctuary movement in New England was characterized by carefully orchestrated collaboration between religious communities and Central America de facto refugee activists. In November 1983, Community Church of Boston became the first Unitarian Universalist community to offer sanctuary to Central American refugee activists in New England. Diego Mendoza Lacán from Guatemala lived for 15 months in the facilities of the Unitarian Universalist congregation located in Boylston Street, Boston. Now, right there, that's a point in which I will welcome clarification. Based on the documentation, what I have is a count of 15 months, but I don't have the exact date of when he left Community Church of Boston and he moved to Canada. So I know that he moved to Canada, but the exact date, month. So if you have any recollection about this, this is very important. Around the same time, Old Cambridge Baptist Church also offered sanctuary to a Salvadorian trade unionist. Estela Ramirez lived in the facilities of the American Baptist congregation and participated in the advocacy efforts throughout the region. The Benedictine monks of Weston Priory declared the priory a public sanctuary in 1984. At the time, it was the 100th public sanctuary in the US. Felipe and Elena Ixcot, MAM speakers from Guatemala, lived with their children in sanctuary at Weston Priory. In 1986, Havrat Shalom in Somerville became the first Jewish sanctuary in Boston. The Egalitarian Jewish Fellowship was already considering the needs of Salvadorian refugees in September 1985, when it hosted a public forum in which Salvadorian refugees shared their experiences. On 29 March 1987, it held a special ceremony to welcome Emilio, a refugee from El Salvador. Members of the Mount Toby Friends Meeting House in Leverett, Massachusetts, became ardent activists demanding fair and just immigration policies. Similarly, the New Hampshire province of the Sisters of Mercy opened its doors to Central American refugees. Sister Angeline Wyden of the Justice and Peace Office of the Diocese of Manchester was an active advocate on behalf of the refugees. The movement then was clearly not limited to Cambridge, to the Cambridge-Boston area. Nevertheless, Cambridge remained an important regional center of advocacy, and the city of Cambridge proclaimed itself a sanctuary city on May 8, 1985. So that's another manifestation of the sanctuary movement. It was not only communities of faith, but cities like Cambridge. But I didn't know this, but also states. So New Mexico, shortly around this time, shortly after, became a sanctuary state in the 1980s. I have done also research at the University of New Mexico on their archives related to the sanctuary movement in New Mexico. Recentering the narrative of the sanctuary movement around the experience of the people living in sanctuary allows us to recover a different story, one characterized by the transnational activism of Central America de facto refugees. Diego, Estela, Felipe, Elena, and Emilio were Central American de facto refugees who partnered with sanctuary religious communities in New England. They play an active role in well-organized campaigns meant to draw attention to US foreign policy in Central America. So let me elaborate on that. One of the issues in writing this history is that for long, the works that have been published about the sanctuary movement have focused on the North American, mostly white communities of faith who embrace the people in sanctuary. So one pushback that I received in this project early on was that we were not hearing about the people, the Central Americans, who were living in sanctuary. So the goal here is to present a narrative in which you emphasize the partnership that existed between the host communities and the Central American activists. The reminder, therefore, of this presentation will discuss the activism of Diego Mendoza Lacán and the People of Community Church of Boston. And the presentation is based on the extensive archival research that we have already described. Throughout the 1980s, the UUA became one of the most involved religious groups in the sanctuary movement. And maybe here we want to move to the next slide on the presentation. I think it's the next one. Yeah, then let's stay on that one. That's the description of the communities of faith based on information that was published by BASTA in 1987. So BASTA was a magazine published by the movement, specifically by the Chicago Task Force. And here again, I have searched for copies of BASTA. I only have one issue of BASTA. And if you have issues of BASTA at home, these are very important. But I have found that try to see if there are libraries that have copies of BASTA, to see if they are for sale in the used books market, but I cannot get hold of them. Pardon me? Yeah, the translation could be like stop. It's an imperative of stop. Yeah, it's an imperative form of stop, like exactly, stop, enough. Enough is a good translation. Thank you. So in June of 1983, the General Assembly of the UUA voted to support and encourage UU societies that gave sanctuary to Salvadorian and Guatemalan refugees. In addition, the General Assembly recommended that all societies engage in a serious searching of conscience on this issue. By 1987, there were 67 Unitarian Universalist related public sanctuaries. Probably if you want to go to the next one. Yeah. Okay, good. That was the highest number of public sanctuaries of any given religious denomination at the time. By comparison, in 1987, there were 64 Roman Catholic and 43 Jewish public sanctuaries. So these were the three religious confessions that were better represented. Thank you. And of course, here you have also the reference to the Quakers. Certainly, these were places of worship that were declared public sanctuaries, yet that did not necessarily mean that they had people living in sanctuary. During the decade, public sanctuary took several modalities, and one of them was to give financial, political, and spiritual support to those places of worship that provided shelter to individuals and or families seeking respite. And that's important for Community Church of Boston because this became an actual sanctuary. There was somebody living here, but there were other communities of faith around the area of New England that provided some form of financial support to Community Church of Boston. I don't know how much. There is some evidence of that. And those places declared themselves sanctuary, but they didn't have people living in sanctuary with them. It was just that they were providing support. So they formed part of a network, more or less. But they actually went through a process of declaring themselves sanctuary. That is national. That is national. Those numbers are national, as published in Boston in 1987. Yeah, good question. Thank you. Yeah, so that's not for New England, while my presentation focuses on New England. Thank you very much. The practice of sanctuary did not have a single national modality. James A. Corbett, and we have a slide here, if you can move forward, please. Good, we can, yeah, we can stay there for a moment. So those images come from the archival materials of Community Church of Boston. James A. Corbett was one of the leading voices of the nascent sanctuary movement. He was a Quaker. In a letter of 10 August 1983, Corbett theorized about some of these modalities. The letter was a concept paper, and it circulated widely among the communities of faith seeking to articulate a response to the refugee crisis. For example, he wrote of the necessity to establish a sanctuary screening and referral service. His chief concern was the access or lack thereof that refugee communities in the US had to information and counseling. He called for the creation of a referral service or a sanctuary screening and referral service. In particular, he singled out the importance of doing outreach among Central American refugees in LA. As he pointed out, the service, and this is Corbett, the service will provide the initial sanctuary screening. It will refer potential sanctuary candidates to counselors, and for those refugees who are not potential sanctuary candidates, the service will provide information about a full range of social and legal services and referrals to appropriate organizations and agencies. Stop. So let me just make a comment here. There are a couple of things about these letters by Corbett. Number one, so there are copies of these letters here in the archives of Community Church of Boston, but Old Cambridge Baptist Church also has copies of them. So these are, as you can see, these are letters written in a typewriter, then some probably Xerox copies, and they circulated. They were not very elaborate. And the thing is that from Arizona, he's sending these letters and they are circulating and they are informing what the activists in different parts of the country are doing. So that's an important connection between Arizona and New England, because you have Old Cambridge Baptist and you have Community Church of Boston reading what Corbett was saying about the sanctuary movement. Yes. No, well, he was Quaker, and at the time, as I know, we are having a conference on Quaker spirituality at BU on April 19. So if you want to join us, you're welcome to come. And I'm reading a paper then on Corbett and his theology of sanctuary. But he was basically a rancher who starts running into people who are crossing the border, and that provides the background for his involvement. Thank you for the question. The other thing about this is that of this screening is that it seems, and I argue this here, that the leaders of the sanctuary movement around the country were they were very selective about the people that they will invite to participate in sanctuary. It was not anyone that they will invite. This memo about the screening is important because it does point to that practice of identifying people who will be invited to live in sanctuary, while other people, other refugees, will be referred to receive services, legal services only. So what were the activists looking for? It seems that there are two things that they were looking for. One, you will hear more about this, they were looking for Central American activists who could speak publicly, who could make presentations, and who could convey the message of the situation in Central America. One. Two, in spite of what happened in Vermont, it seems that the leaders anticipated that it would be difficult to live in sanctuary. They anticipated the difficulty. Think about that, somebody living within the confines of a place for 15 months. It's an important problem. But that point is some speculation. The first point is clear, that they were selecting and identifying activists from Central America who could actually make public presentations and could communicate the message of sanctuary. Corbett also advanced a second concept, namely the creation of a system of standby refuse. He realized that the practice of public sanctuary could pose a risk to the safety of refugees. And this goes to what I was saying. Once their identity and location were disclosed, so places like Community Church of Boston became publicly a sanctuary for refugees. And the people who live in sanctuary had an active role. They were interviewed by newspapers. So there was risk involved. Not everybody could take that kind of risk. You did. Hence, he intended this system to help protect the identity of de facto refugees, as he described this alternative. In this connection, we also need to develop a system of standby refuge for refugees who do not wish to participate in declared public sanctuary. That's a quote. So end of quote. So there he's imagining a system in which you have places that can provide sanctuary, but not publicly, and other places that could become publicly declared sanctuaries. So you have that. Sanctuary in the New England region took on different modalities. The experience of Community Church of Boston represented one of them. The chief characteristic was the public role that the refugee living in sanctuary play in presentations meant to create and raise awareness about the civil war in Guatemala. In April 1983, the board of directors of Community Church voted to use their facilities as a place of public sanctuary. And in June of that year, the decision was ratified by those attending the congregation's annual meeting. Reverend William E. Alberts, the leading minister and members of the Community Church of Boston Sanctuary Planning Committee, drafted a sanctuary statement later that year, at some point after June 1983 and around September of 1983. The statement appeared in the form of a circular letter, and I think I have a copy of that here. The statement appeared in the form of a circular letter Let's see. Yeah, one more right there. The statement appeared in the form of a circular letter and it became a model for other places of sanctuary throughout New England. Important point. So I have found many of these statements in different places. So Old Cambridge Baptist Church has a statement like this. There's a Jewish synagogue there's a synagogue in Sudbury. They also adopted a statement. So this practice of adopting statement, it seems began here at Community Church of Boston and was followed by other groups. The statement summarized the reasons why the board of directors had decided to provide sanctuary for Central American and other refugees who are pursued by immigration authorities and whose deportation will result in their imprisonment or execution. The political situation in Central America and dissatisfaction with US policies towards El Salvador and Guatemala feature prominently in Community Church's statement. I quote, "In providing sanctuary, we're saying no to the United States' oppressive, undemocratic intervention in Central America in our name, and yes to self-determination and justice in their name," end of quote. Democracy, understood as the sovereign right of people to self-determination, was the primordial political principle that Community Church considered to be at stake. The activists at Community Church of Boston drew a parallel between El Salvador and the war in Vietnam, describing US involvement in the civil war in El Salvador as another Vietnam. One of the rhetorical strategies in the statement was the use of counter definitions. This is again in the statement of Community Church of Boston. The Salvadoran Revolution was not imported from Nicaragua, Cuba, and the Soviet Union. Instead, it was a direct result of the oppression exported by the United States. Similarly, it stated that democracy is a code word for imperialism, freedom a code word for terror, and patriotism a code word for plunder. And I quote from the statement. More importantly, the declaration disputed the characterization of Salvadorian de facto refugees as economic refugees. We believe, it continued, that the administration is seeking to cover up its oppressive policies by claiming the people are leaving El Salvador for economic reasons, end of quote. To the contrary, they were fleeing political persecution, and the policies of the US were an important factor and forced people to leave the country. In this way, Community Church appropriated the lexicon of the Cold War and redeployed it in defense of the practice of sanctuary. I will skip a part here. Since warned me, he said, don't take more than 3 hours. That's the warning that I received from him. But then he said, but then we get hungry. So, so I'm going to skip a part here that describes the formation of the committee here at Community Church of Boston. But there was the formation of the committee. The composition is very important, I think. But I want to move to talk about Diego's participation. An important aspect of the practice of sanctuary at Community Church of Boston was the public role played by Diego Mendoza Lacán, who adopted the sanctuary name of Manuel Hernandez. A strategy of the sanctuary movement was to identify refugees who will be talented speakers and communicators capable of explaining the situation in Central America to larger audiences. Diego Mendoza Lacán fitted the bill. He was a student, painter, and poet who left his country fearing for his life and seeking safety in the US. In Boston, he used his skills to call attention to the genocidal war taking place in Guatemala and to demand that asylum seekers in the US be treated fairly. Despite living in sanctuary, Mendoza Lacán enjoyed some mobility and was actively engaged in advocacy. So this is an interesting thing. So he lived here in Sanctuary, but actually he was leaving the facilities. So he was, so his activism included public speaking, writing, and painting. His public speaking began from the moment he came to live in Sanctuary at Community Church of Boston. On November 27, 1983, Community Church of Boston held a joint worship service at Arlington Street Church. Mendoza Lacán spoke during the service, and a selection of poems by the Guatemalan writer Julia Esquivel were read. At the end of the service, Manuel Hernandez and his supporters walked in procession from Arlington Street Church, located at 351 Boston Street in Boston, to the building of Community Church of Boston, located at 565 Boston Street. Now, Dean found a copy of the bulletin for that day, which is right here. This is the actual bulletin that was used for that service at Arlington Baptist Church from 1983, Arlington Street Church, I'm sorry. The Quetzalcoatl here in the depiction is actually the drawing of Manuel. It's an element that you're going to see in some of the paintings that he did here. There are some elements of the program that I wonder. So he was also a poet, and as I just mentioned, he translated some of the poems of Esquivel. But I don't know which of the poems that appear in the program were actually his work and were translated to English. So that's a question. But at the very end of the bulletin, you will see that invitation to go in procession from Arlington Street Church to Community Church of Boston. So that's something I find interesting. This group of people, this is how public the movement wanted to be, them leaving Arlington. So they have a complete liturgy for that service. And then they leave in procession and they come to this place. That is an image that it would be very nice if it was recorded or taped at the time to see it again. But there are a couple of things there. One, the sanctuary movement made a lot of use of liturgy or liturgies. So something that you don't find among many activists today, but at this point, they're using it as a vehicle of protest. So that's one thing. The other one is that it does indicate how public they wanted to be about their actions. So here you have the bulletin if you want to see it at the end. Yeah, there are newspaper clippings. Manuel was very active during his time in sanctuary at Community Church of Boston. In fact, by 1984, Manuel had already visited over 100 churches and schools. So this comes from the writings of Albert. 14 months later, in January 1985, he had completed around 175 speaking engagements in the Boston area, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York. According to Reverend Alberts, the minister at CCB, Manuel was giving witness of the situation in Guatemala. Manuel's public speaking included interviews with journalists. Indeed, the sanctuary movement did not shy away from the press. To the contrary, the sanctuary movement actively sought press coverage to bring attention to American involvement in Central America. Manuel used his time in sanctuary to denounce both the way that the United States used asylum as an instrument of foreign policy, as well as the human rights abuses that were taking place in Guatemala. While it is not well known, Manuel was also a poet. Only 2 of his poems were locally published by Community Church of Boston and used in print educational materials. So this is what I have found, translations of his poems that are accredited to him with his name, only two times, but there are more. However, some of his poems have been located among the archival holdings of Community Church of Boston. The context for the writing of one poem seems to be illuminated by an interview he gave to the Boston Globe's Philip Bennett. So we have an image of that poem, no, of one of the poems. So if you go to, oh, by the way, this is one of the, this manuscript is important. It's around June 1986, and it's an outline of how Community Church of Boston is going about the recruitment of people who are going to work with the Sanctuary Movement. So the Community Church of Boston had a very strict screening of volunteers. So around this time, one thing that was happening, I think it's already 85 or 86, around this time, is that Old Cambridge Baptist Church, there are a couple of break-ins, and it becomes very public that it seems that the FBI has some kind of presence in plain clothes. And so the people are very aware of this, and what they're doing is that they create a very strict screening for volunteers. Now, if you continue, I'll come back to this in a moment. So that's one of the poem by Manuel, by Diego, and essentially here at Community Church of Boston, we have a file. There's a folder with this cover letter. If you go back, this is image number 15. Okay. I'm sorry, you went too far. Yes, keep going forward. Keep going forward. Thank you. Keep going. Keep going. Right there. So as you can see, this letter is from 1986. He was no longer living at Community Church of Boston, but he's in Canada, and he's coming to Community Church of Boston. And what they do, the Cultural Center in Cambridge, the Cambridge Multicultural Arts Center, they put together an exhibition of the paintings by Hernandez. Now, that's the cover letter, right? Next to this cover letter, and held by only a metal plate, is a series of 7 or 8 poems. None of them are signed. There are no names to it. So you have the cover letter, you have that letter that talks about the paintings, and close to that letter is this series of poems. So we don't have the names of who wrote the poems. Thank you. And the next image, please, that's one of the poems included in that group. As you can see, the Roman numeral 1 on top. So there's a series of them, but there's no signature. Now, there's a newspaper clipping in the archives of an interview that was done by Philip Bennett of the Boston Globe. And in that interview, Diego relates a story. So I'm going to read that in a moment. And we have that interview. Diego is relating this experience that he has here in Boston. And then one of the poems relates the same story. So that what that means is that the poems can be attributed to Diego. So it's not only the circumstance that the cover letter talks about his paintings and they're all together, but we have this external evidence that he was interviewed, he describes a scene, and we find the same scene in one of the poems. So I will continue reading here. The context of the writing of these poems seems to be illuminated by an interview he gave to the Boston Globe's Philip Bennett, which was published on November 20, 1984. In the interview, Manuel told Bennett, once, and this is a quote from the interview, once I went out walking to Copley Place, I saw in one of those stores a fabric, just like the ones my mother weaves in Guatemala. My heart stopped, and I went inside just to read the tag to see made in Guatemala. And he continues, but there was no tag on the inside. It was as if we didn't exist. End of quote. Manuel alluded to this episode in his poem Madre Arte, in which he describes the ability of art, whom he calls his mother, to cross borders. So what I have here is a fragment of that poem in Spanish. So I will read it in Spanish. But
You want the translation?
you found it? So yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, either language will be fine, but
Well, the only thing I can, but I have to warn you, I read this poem in 2 conferences in last semester, and both times I was crying. I have to stop. But he says, un día de paseo por el shopping mall te vi, madre. Te vi un edificio moderno de la esquina del Southwest of Copley Square in Boston. Madre, no sabía que tú eres hábil en cruzar el borde con facilidad, la frontera de un lugar prohibido. Tu hijo, con la visión cuidadosa y la mente despierta, le costó mucho trabajo en cruzarla y tuve que cargar cargas pesadas con mecapal para mostrar que soy un hombre fuerte para atravesarla. And here's the English translation, but you know, it's interesting. Yeah, it is attributed to him here. So this is the English translation. Mother, you are a woman, teacher of all the artists of this world. You weave your decorative patterns over your kiem, irradiating it with the warmth of your love for your children and spouse. One day, while strolling through a shopping mall, I saw you, mother. I saw you in the most modern building on the southwest corner of Copley Square in Boston. Mother, I didn't know you were so agile. You crossed the border with such ease, the frontier of a forbidden place. Your son, mentally alert and with anxious eyes, has such a hard time crossing it. I had to carry heavy loads with my mecapal to prove I was man enough to run it. Yeah. So this, there you have it. That is the event or that scene that he described to Bennett in the interview. And then I didn't know, I'm sure I have this among the scanned images, but I didn't see this. So thank you. This is exactly why I'm doing this here with you. Yeah.
research in action.
Exactly.
We have a bunch of folks who were here, you know, on the Zoom. So this is you gathering information.
Okay, so I'm about to finish. Then, in addition to his public speaking, Manuel used his skills as a graphic artist and painter. He produced nearly 15 paintings during his time at Community Church of Boston. His paintings included a depiction of a pregnant woman being disemboweled, a burning village, and the Quetzal. Some of his paintings, like Guatemala Burning and Quetzal, were turned into posters and postcards, and sold to raise funds to cover his expenses while living in sanctuary. In fact, his painting Guatemala Burning was included in the 1987-1988 catalog of the Syracuse Cultural Workers. An exhibition of his paintings was held at Cambridge Multicultural Center from October 25th to November 21st, 1986. And that's the catalog of the cultural workers. And if you go forward one slide, that's exactly where you can see on the top, you can see Guatemala Burning, which is his painting right there. Very good. Now, I will just summarize now by making reference to his visit in 1986. That visit in 1986 is very important. He had already left Community Church of Boston. He was living in Canada. But when he comes here for that exhibition of his paintings in Cambridge, it turns out that he invites Rigoberta Menchu, the Guatemala activist, and she comes here to Community Church of Boston. Now, when I began scanning materials here at Community Church of Boston, one day I was with Dean in the 5th floor, and we were looking at bulletins like the one he just showed us. And then there's a box full of tapes, and Dean just reaches down and pulls one, and he's saying, we have all these tapes of people who come here and we have recorded them, and it's just a huge collection. Probably one day we can digitize them. And say, wow. So the tape that he's holding in his hand, and he looks more carefully into it or closely, and he shows it to me, and it was a tape of that day when Rigoberta Menchú was at Community Church of Boston, and that tape is digitized. So I found the digital copy, and we have both Rigoberta Menchú talking here. We just transcribed that speech the last semester, and he also gave a speech that day in which he talks about human rights violations in Guatemala and so on. And that's the last time that we have Diego here at Community Church of Boston. I will stop there. It is history in the making, or at least the historiography of it. Thank you very much for your patience. And you took the blue bulletin, right?
What's that?
You took the other bulletin.
It's under your laptop. Oh, okay, that goes
Here
back
it
in
is.
the archive.
Here it is.
Where are my white gloves?
Well, thank you very much. So if you have any questions or comments, as I said, and that has already happened here, anything that you would like to say that you think was not clear, I didn't get right, or anything, I'd be happy to hear.
Let's sing one song, and then we'll have a rich Q&A, because we have on the Zoom a number of folks who were here during the early 80s, and we'd love to hear from them. The likes of Mike Heichman, Tilly Teixeira, Ron Escobar Shapiro, and of course, Sonny and Jean. But first, we got a song I can't help but share with you. And I wish I had these digitized on Zoom. These are note cards or greeting cards that are paintings by Manuel Diego, and the church marketed them and has a description of Manuel. And we also have just one more thing. This is a poster of one of Manuel's paintings. It's a beautiful picture of a Guatemalan indigenous woman, but there's fire and a house on fire and helicopters in the air. It's called Sanctuary: Embracing the Oppressed and Confronting Their Oppressors. It's somewhere in this building, we have a whole bunch of the copies of this, but this is the framed one that lives in the entrance to the church.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to publish more of these.
Open G.
Yeah.
We were going to start the intro.
Old guy. Okay. We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. We'll build a land, Miss Land that can be. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice will roll down like a river, Peace like a river
flowing stream.
Close.
We'll build a land where we bring the good tidings to all the afflicted and all those who mourn, and we'll give them garlands instead of ashes. Oh, we'll build a land where peace is born. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. Come build a land where mantles of praises resound from spirits once faint and once weak, where like oaks of righteousness stand her people. Oh, come build the land, my people we seek. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, peace like an ever-flowing stream. Peace like an ever-flowing stream. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie.
You're welcome. Thank you, Dean.
Oh, I wish we had those postcards or greeting cards digitized, and we really need to print some out. Crystal, our publications manager, says it will be an easy task to print more of these and have them available for you. And well, we do. This is a pretty good approximation. We do not have the original artwork, and I want to be in touch with the one family member whose name is Dolores Mendoza Romero. She could not be with us because she is at work. She lives in California, and I've been in touch with her through Facebook, and I have a phone number for her. And Rady, maybe you'd love to talk to her as well. Maybe
So, Dean,
there's
can I add
some, oh, okay, coming, Sonny, hold on. So maybe we can find the originals, but with these postcards, we can reproduce new postcards. So this is where we welcome all the people joining us remotely. And I want to recognize Sonny first and foremost, and Jean. Go ahead.
How about me?
Thank you, Dean. So a point I want to make is that Manuel Diego's Living in Sanctuary at Community Church was actually very much supported by and involved with two different groups. There was the whole community church group, of which I think Lee was just speaking up and was very much a part of what happened. And that was the way in which Carolyn McDade was so involved in community church and really working with Manuel, and in fact had a big role, I think, in helping facilitate his moving on to Canada in his refugee status. But also the Guatemala Committee of CASA, the Central America Solidarity Committee, all of the countries of Central America were represented by separate committees from CASA. But the Guatemala Committee of CASA never met at CASA, which was over at Old Cambridge Baptist Church. For all the first years, we were meeting at the community church very specifically so we could meet with Manuel, so that we had his guidance, his insights, his suggestions of what kind of activities we were doing could be carried out by the committee. And for example, you referenced the exhibit at the Multicultural Center in Cambridge. So Janet Lane was a member of our committee. She happened to be working there. So it was the Guatemala committee that worked with Janet to make that presentation. And Manuel's work in conjunction with Community Church and CASA was also very much tied to NISWA, the Network in Solidarity with the People of Guatemala, which was then based in Washington, is now based in Oakland, California, but very much alive. And NISWA was who brought Rigoberta Menchú to all of the United States for the fall tour kinds of activities that we used to do. So, and there are many other people besides myself. I see Ron Shapiro is with us here today, who were part of the Guatemala committee. I know for example, have a lot of the pieces of the exhibit from the Cambridge Multicultural Center in my file cabinet here. So there are many, many pieces that relate to this work. And I think the central issue is just to point out how much was located within the very broad-based, multifaceted solidarity work of the greater Boston area. 2 or 3 other quick pieces to link to that is we should remember that Joe Moakley was our representative at that point in time, and his principal aide was Jim McGovern, now Representative Jim McGovern of Worcester. So they were very facilitative of some of this work in the Boston area. And an interesting sideline, perhaps for Rady to explore more, is that the Congregational Church of Needham, through Clark and Kay Taylor, raised the issue of whether they would also become a sanctuary church. And in fact, that church decided not to take on the big task of being a sanctuary church, but entered into a partnership with the village of Santa Maria Ceja in the Ixcan. That partnership continues to this day, 35 years later. They actually leave on Wednesday for this year's trip to Guatemala. So there are threads and threads and threads that go on. One other piece that I would mention, and I know Jean wants to add a piece, is once Manuel Diego left Community Church and went to Canada, our committee never moved back to Casa to meet, but we then went and started meeting in the home of Jose Sotes in Cambridge. Now, Jose was a labor leader in Guatemala who came to this country with the great assistance of Karen Brandow, who before her untimely death a few years ago was very much partnered with Charlie King and doing all kinds of music. And Karen helped Jose get here. Jose had refugee status here because when the Guatemala military tried to subdue Jose by shooting at him, they missed Jose and in fact severed the spine of his son Joselito, so that Jose and Joselito then were the center of the Guatemala committee's work for a long, long time. So obviously there are other pieces that if Rady is interested in, we can help bring to his attention. And I want to pass for a moment to Jean, who wants to mention another very key person in the solidarity work in the Boston-Cambridge area.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that he knows Jim Haney's work, because Jim is really responsible for a lot of what happened in terms of organizing around Central America. And David Weinstein, I believe, who lives in Jamaica Plain, has all of Jim's material. Okay, at least the overview Latin America stuff, which Jim was writing and which had stuff in it that nobody else had. And Noam Chomsky used to use Jim's work. That's how Noam got a lot of his information. And people, I think, that know the solidarity movement, which is where the sanctuary movement came out of, really know what happened in terms of how significant Jim was. And Jim has spoken. He was given the Sacco and Vanzetti Award back just before he died. So I just want to make sure that his name gets raised in terms of his significance and how involved he was in all kinds of things.
So in summary, I would just say in closing that it's really important to understand that the sanctuary effort came out of the much, much larger solidarity effort. It was not the reverse of that. So thanks very much.
Jim Harney of blessed memory received Sacco and Vanzetti Award in 2008. Sonny and Jean, thank you so much for joining us, and I will definitely connect you and Rady and get each other's contact information, because this is a wellspring of information and above and beyond a wellspring of inspiration. Thank you both. Any response, Rady, or?
No, this is exactly why I asked for the opportunity to read the paper here.
This is why I asked for the opportunity to read the paper here. Let me give you.
I am saying that this is exactly why I asked for the opportunity to read the paper here, to get your feedback. It is a very impressive wealth of information. And the networks that you're making reference to were really thick. And so I'm glad that I had this chance to hear you. And I'm sure they will be following up with you. Thank you.
Rachel Wyatt.
Hi. Well, I think Jean and Sonny really have, okay, my name's Rachel Wyan, and I've been part of the Central America Solidarity movement since, I guess, about 1980, when Monsignor Romero was assassinated, was when my life really changed. Went to live in Nicaragua and came back and continued to work in solidarity with Nicaragua and El Salvador, and on the fringes with Guatemala too, of course. I met Manuel shortly after he became, started to live here in Sanctuary. And I think one thing that I really just want to say about him, he was indigenous. His first language was not Spanish. His first language was, I believe, Quiche. Okay. But I remember speaking to him, he learned English very quickly. And I said, is it okay? I mean, because I speak Spanish fluently. He said, no, English is fine. Because it wasn't his native language to speak Spanish. It was an imposed language. That really hit me. I hadn't really quite understood, when we say everything has to be bilingual, Spanish and English, because it's, it's too imperialist if it's only English. The Spanish was an imperial language too. And he just raised so many things. And the Quetzal, of course, which is the beautiful symbol of freedom that has never lived never lived in a cage. That bird is always free. So this is wonderful. This is just such a great opportunity to think about all of those years of the solidarity that we continue with El Salvador, because we have a Cambridge sister city. San Jose Las Flores and Cambridge have been sister cities since 1987. And we are actually going on a delegation in April, a small group of people from Cambridge, finally after COVID, to be able to get back there. So thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Just we're talking to just these remarkable activists that go back early 80s. Is just a really incredible thing to have Rachel here, and Sonny and Jean. I believe that Charlie and Karen have their hand up in the Zoom. Will you join us, Charlie and Karen?
Hi, thank you. My name is Karen Slater. I go back to the old Cambridge Baptist Church, OCBC, 1980s. My son, who's now in his 40s, was there at the Children's Cooperative, so every day I was there. I remember the bomb threat. I remember the FBI informant or suspected informants, and the actual small bomb going off. I was also part of CASA. I was in the July 26th, and still am, in the July 26th coalition. I remember very, very important meetings that we had there at the old Cambridge Baptist Church. And I remember the signs out front welcoming the immigrants, and that this was a sanctuary church right on the lawn on Mass Ave. You couldn't pass the church and go down toward Harvard or MIT and not see those signs. We also used that church for packing for caravans down to Central America. And it was just a beautiful time and an important time to be an activist. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Looking through the archives, I found a song co-written by Carolyn and Manuel, and it's called Himno a la Alegría, which is Hymn to Happiness. There's no lyrics there, though, and I'm dying to hear that song. Maybe we'll find it sometime through the Carolyn McDade archives or something. Himno a la Alegría, Hymn to Happiness. Alan, take it away.
Do I need to be in the camera? So, where's the camera? so first, I want to thank our guests. Thank you so much for digging into our archives. It's great. It's wonderful. I don't want to dwell on it, but I'd actually like to hear from community church members or anyone that was around at that time, if they can talk a little bit about what happened at board meetings. Sort of, what was it? Was it Bill Alberts or was it Donald Lothrop? I saw, at that time he had retired, but was it a ministerial push or was it a committee? Was it certain members that were part of these committees and support groups that are just being talked about? I was just wondering the dynamics about how did it unfold that community church really stood front and center. I'd just like to hear that, but I don't want to dwell on it so much. Thanks.
I certainly was not a part of that group, but it's my understanding that Carolyn played a big role in influencing the decision to, in fact, take that sanctuary step. And, the people I knew from community church at that point were Jane Polly and Harry, who were the people who linked between the church and the Guatemala Committee of CASA.
Jane Polly and Harry Landfield of blessed memory, who received the Sacco Vanzetti Award in 2002.
Right.
Yes. Ron Escobar Shapiro, are you with us? Do you have some memories you could share with us?
He wasn't involved yet.
Let me just see. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sure can,
Okay.
Ron. Hello.
Very good. Good. I'm going to be brief. I was one who joined community church because the sanctuary committee was already, because Manuel was already in sanctuary at community church. So I got involved after, but to get on that committee, I remember it being very difficult. There was a process. I had to wait to get on the sanctuary committee. I remember Alan Kapner letting me know that I could join. I know, Dick Kashishian also was involved. Dick Crowley, Lee Fitch, Lee, you're amazing. And there were, and Harry and Jane and Doric Gloss.
Right.
There was just some wonderful, wonderful committed activists who were willing to give their time and their lives towards this cause. And there are other people who are connected. Bill Alberts was huge in pushing this, and then Eva, you saw her name as well as Dick's and Wendell Brown's on that, whatever that the one piece of the notes that were shown earlier. But and then community church continued after, and CASA was, my gosh, continued after Manuel left for Canada. We stayed active. We I remember Doric Gloss started a group on Lance. At Community Church, we used to have these Friday concerts, and just to bring attention to these issues, but we were really, Sonny really talked about the different threads, and they were so important to this whole movement. In Nisquire, and I think of Joanne and Daryl, who are now in Martha's Vineyard, and their role with Gap and the accompaniment, and the involvement we had with Guatemalan refugees in Mexico, and then when people returned from Mexico to Guatemala afterwards, and the joy that people could return. So there's just so much. There's just so much. I can continue to go on, but I think I'll let other people speak.
Thanks.
Here's Rady.
Yeah, let me just, for the benefit of the camera. So a couple of things here. One is that this point about the larger context of the solidarity movement and that relationship with the sanctuary movement, I really appreciate that. I'm thinking about it in terms of my remarks about how you have other movements around the time and people walking into the sanctuary movement with other commitments. But I mentioned that I skip a part about the organization of the committee here. And let me just read from my paper here. The Sanctuary Planning Committee was already active since the spring of 1983. This is at Community Church of Boston. The committee was chaired by Caroline McDade, and other members included Eva Alberts, Bill Alberts, Sybil Cox, or Sybil, thank you, Cynthia Foster, Gertrude Friedman, Bob Green, Hope Haptemariam, Mike Heichman, Diane Jaffe, Jeffrey Lewis, Ellen Mass, Ines Miller, John O'Brien, Jane Poley, and Lorraine Roth. The other point from the paper is the connection with the Chicago Task Force. So there is a memo of that, of the Community Church of Boston Sanctuary Planning Committee, and they make reference to their contact with the Chicago Task Force. So in that memo, it says, we have made contact with the Chicago Religious Task Force and are preparing to welcome one or more up to 3 refugees into our midst by possibly Thanksgiving. In so doing, we are politically confronting and seeking to change US policy. And it continues. So in addition to that, the solidarity movement here in Cambridge, I think that connection with Chicago and Arizona are very important. But what you're calling our attention to is the actual people who make those bridges. I will stop there, but I just wanted to read those names of the Sanctuary Planning Committee in 1983.
And to some of those folks, we say presente. And to others, we say, come on in. Mike Heichman, for example, you're there. Say hello to us and tell us your recollections.
Well, I must confess that I have memory issues. So I'm very pleased that my name was included, but I don't even remember that. I was involved, but I don't think I was actively involved as many of the people who've been named. Did anybody contact Eva and Amy, who actually lived in the church?
I regret to say that I did not, and I had thoughts about it and just was so filled with other things. It didn't get a hold of either of them. It would have been great to have them because they lived in the building at the same time. And I'm sure, yeah, Eva and daughter Amy.
Right, exactly. And the person who's doing the research here, should definitely contact them. The other thought is in terms of like what came out of this, which was, is like, you're right, Gene, that this was part of the solidarity movement. But I think Manuel and being here and the work that came out of that, I believe led to the Pledge of Resistance. Do you remember? I think the Pledge of Resistance came after Manuel, and I think it was one of the threads that led to the Pledge of Resistance against the invasion of Central America. It was a very large group of people that were organized in affinity groups and were prepared to commit civil obedience in case of another invasion or an escalation. That was a question. Maybe Gene remembers, maybe others remember when the pledge came. And I think that came shortly after. And I think that was one of the contributions of the Manuel being at the community church.
I think,
Would anybody like to comment on the Pledge of Resistance?
yeah,
Gene, was that you?
Start speaking.
wait a minute, I have to unmute. There,
No.
can
You
you
might
hear
have just muted.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
I believe, a lot of people were involved in the Pledge of Resistance, but I think it came out of AFSC. That's where I think the original Pledge of Resistance came from. And it wasn't just Boston. It was a nationwide movement in terms of the Pledge of Resistance. That particular event that we did, I believe it was I think it was in mid 80s. It was 1985, I think. I'm trying to remember the big day where we had over 500 people do a sit-in in City Hall.
May 1st, 1985.
Yeah, so it was 85, and it was in the federal building, I believe, wasn't it?
In the JFK building, yes.
Right. So that was
I was there.
that was happening in a number of places right across the country, but I believe the impetus for it was AFSC in conjunction with other folks. But that was really where it came out of originally. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that's what happened.
And let me say, just in terms of the Guatemala Committee itself, we continued to meet as a committee until well after 2001, 2002, under a lot of the leadership of Rene Van Rompuy, who had lived and worked in Guatemala for years. But we were then meeting, as I said earlier, at the home of Jose Sots over in Cambridge. So that, and then I think we should draw in again the continued work of the Guatemala Partnership in Needham, what Rachel was saying about the Cambridge El Salvador Sister City continuing to go forward. And I would really be amiss if I didn't point out that MAPA, the Massachusetts Association of Peace for Peace Action, has an active Latin America and Caribbean working group, which just happens to be meeting tomorrow, the 13th, from 5 to 6:30 by Zoom. And so if you're interested in continuing the current Central America and Latin America solidarity work, be sure to let Dean know. And then Dean, you can pass all that email on to me, and I will get people connected to that meeting tomorrow and monthly going forward.
Thank you, Sonny, for doing such a great job of connecting 40 years ago to now.
Right.
And now, not only MAPA Central America, but also the Pledge of Resistance led into the next enormous focus of energy, which is Boston, El Salvador Sister City committees. And there were several of them, some of which are very active now. Rachel mentioned Cambridge. Arlington is another one that has been taken over by a whole younger, new group of folks that do all kinds of activities in Arlington, have a school curriculum for fourth graders to talk about Central America and El Salvador. There's some dormant ones like Belmont and Watertown. Susie and I were very active in Watertown, sister city with Nueva Esperanza, El Salvador for 32 years or so. So the work continues, and this place is and hopefully will be even more strongly a focus for that work. Rady.
So this has been very helpful. I have a question for you. Yeah, okay. So I have a question for you. In the archives, I found one small piece of paper that says that Manuel, the point is that the paper records an opinion at Community Church of Boston or an opinion on part of the leadership of the Sanctuary Planning Committee. And Manuel is described as being more radical or becoming more radicalized. And it seems that it appears that there is a situation in which the members of Community Church of Boston who are involved in the sanctuary movement, they are seeing Manuel as, they are like finding some difficulty or having some difficulty in controlling Manuel.
Huh.
Now, I can read this. I can read this. It's at the very end of the paper. I will read it. Which I found very interesting, given the profile of Community Church of Boston. What is it that they will call? So here it is. In a typed note written sometime before October 14, 1984, Community Church of Boston member Dick Keshishian quoted another member as saying, "Manuel is becoming more politicized." That's a quote, more politicized. Now, it will be helpful to know the context of that comment.
Right.
Part of the situation is that when you look at the sanctuary experience with the Benedictine brothers in Vermont and with the Quaker meeting in Hartford, in both cases, the sanctuary event did not end well. It did not end well for the community and for the families involved. And because as we pointed out, people are living in these conditions for over a year, 2 years. In Vermont, it was even longer. So any recollections about that?
The first response is more politicized. Yes, Community Church of Boston will do that to you. There's no question about that. But any recollections from the Zoomers or anybody in the audience about
Yes.
the end? Go ahead. Who is that? Lee Fitch.
Yeah, my recollections are so positive. I love being with Manuel. We would go in, Cynthia Foster, and we would take him, we would go for walks and just enjoy his company. I don't remember very much politics at all, but I do have my card, and I have a few of these.
Yes.
But,
Yeah.
One of a set of 4.
yeah, it says on, and when you were showing those papers, I saw this little thing that I had written, these cards with such and such. I just recognized my handwriting. Huh? when he was giving the speech and showing some posters or some signs from something.
Eva Alberts would be quite a resource in this regard. I'm even more sorry. I'll have to share the YouTube.
We shifted, we worked very hard to get him to go. But
I just wanted to ask, do you feel like the comment about Manuel becoming more politicized, did you feel that was a caution or a worry, or might have been a good thing. Yeah, a comment that it was a good thing.
I wrote this, as I wrote this, I think I left out some information about the name of who actually said this. Because before I used the name, I wanted to get more insight. But there is a name, there is actually somebody who is saying this. And at least the way I read it, it seems that is resulting in, there is some kind of conflict going on that probably Manuel wants to remember that it's more public, that Manuel probably wants to continue going out more and saying more about the situation in Guatemala. And it seems that at that point, for some reason, there is a sense that he shouldn't. At least somebody feels that way. Yeah.
But one person doesn't mean the whole group. And I think what, I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, they can.
Yes, Jean.
Everybody at community church wasn't the same. It's not a monolithic association. There is a tendency to be moved, they're on the left, but there are varying things that are happening. And being politicized was not a problem in those days.
Right.
That was the point of the whole solidarity movement,
Right.
was to politicize the whole US, for God's sakes, so that there would be some movement within the committee itself is not unusual. And there was a question of Bill Albert in terms of the dynamic of how he worked with other people within community church, because there was some conflict with Bill in terms of certain things. And people in the church know that. So I think you have to be very careful about raising the question that there was a politicization going on. The way I understand liberation theology is consciousness raising is the first step. Politicization is the next step.
Right.
Okay, moving towards social change. And that's what was happening and did happen in the United States throughout this movement. That was the reason for why Manuel really was able to even move out the way he did. The contacts were there because we had done that work. But the point of the thing was to get people politically involved and to be politicized.
Right.
And how in God's name would you expect Manuel not to be politicized? Every person I know that was Central American that came here that did not have information even, because they had their experience, but they didn't know the history, etc., became politicized when they got here even. So that wasn't unusual for that to happen. So please don't make it seem as though there was terrific conflict within that group. The whole purpose of Sanctuary was to move people on if they wanted to be moved on. And I don't understand about the Vermont thing. I know there was conflict there ultimately, but they lived there for a long time with those folks. Can't hear you.
Go ahead, start over.
That is exactly why I asked the question. And coming here, I had a short conversation with Dean during the week. And I mentioned, I have 3 questions for you. This was the third one, because I found the note very intriguing. And I was wondering if there was something happening here, similar or parallel to the kind of situations that were developing in Hartford and up in Vermont. And that is why I found it striking, thinking exactly of what you just described, about the mentality of the period, the kind of political culture that you had here at Community Church of Boston. So finding that annotation was surprising. And I don't know what it meant. And that is why I wanted to get feedback from you about what is happening here in the community.
I think Lee would be critical.
I wanted to show everybody this framed article that is about Manuel. It says, "Death if he returns," says Guatemalan. And it's here in the sanctuary if you're interested in reading it. And the other thing I wanted to say is what's going to politicize you more than coming from a country where there was just a genocide of 200,000 indigenous people. That's what happened in Guatemala. Alan has a quick comment.
Yeah, I did want to make a comment. In your presentation, you mentioned in 1983 that in February there was a committee formed or something like that. And then you mentioned at the 1983 in June, the annual meeting. That's important because that is here at Community Church. That's how we do things. We vote on things. And we have a fiscal meeting in February, which is today here. And we have our annual meeting, which are elections. It's an election meeting. Other things, other bylaw changes, big decisions also happen at the June annual meeting. So it's important that decision was made. So many people may not have, they might have heard it, but I really go, oh yeah, okay, there's a decision made. And that is, again, how we operate here. So Dick Kashishian, who took the note that you just referred to before, he was the clerk. So he was basically he's recording minutes of some kind of meeting. And, someone voiced that opinion. It's really difficult to read a lot into that one note, I think. But I'm assuming that it reflects that in the broader community, just like at Old Cambridge, who has been infiltrated, there's probably suspicions and fears and a little bit of paranoia going on about, what's happening here. And I'm sure that was reflected multiple times at meetings. And so, but anyway, Dick was clerk then, right? That's okay. No, it was much before that. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
We're coming to near the end because we have to transition to our annual fiscal meeting. And what time? I wish I had a clock nearby. Is it getting to be like quarter to 1?
1 o'clock.
Yeah. We
1:08.
really have to conclude. And but Dick, one more quick comment.
Mhm.
So am I. And so I'd like to facilitate that conversation with anybody who would like to talk to Rady about that. Go ahead.
I was involved with Manuel, supportively, got to know him pretty well. Don't speak Spanish, but he spoke English well, so we could communicate that way. But I myself was transformed by the Vietnam War, and then by Community Church. My first time coming to Community Church was 1982. And Paul Robeson Jr. was a speaker, and I was impressed, to say the least. And I've been connected with Community Church since then. Manuel, I wasn't involved with the people that organized the sanctuary. I was just supportive of it and curious about it. I admired Carolyn McDade. She was a force to be dealt with in a gentle way. She wasn't someone that demanded things, but she persuaded people to be involved. Excuse me. One other comment it was while Manuel was here, he had a house built for him, a sanctuary inside the church. It wasn't a large space, but it was a good space for him to have his own private space. I thought that I wasn't involved with the building of that, but I was impressed with how that decision was made to do that, and the people got the resources together, the plywood and whatever was needed to make him a private space. So the church was very supportive of Manuel in that respect, for example. That's all I want to say right now.
That was on the third floor, and it later became known as the Guatemala Room. And it is now Sacco and Vanzetti Repository, and maybe will again become a Guatemala Room when we are able to take some walls down and make it a big meeting space and conference room and living room for the church and library. I'm sorry to conclude, but we do have an annual fiscal meeting coming up, and remembering this fiscal meeting is a remembrance of John Mannheim, who passed away, who was our treasurer for many years. I don't know that he would appreciate having a fiscal meeting dedicated to him, but I just did it anyway, just to maybe bring light to that meeting and to the important work that we have to get done. I just want to end with another poem by Carolyn McDade that I don't know the melody to quite yet. Bearing words born new unto each day, speaking bold where only silence lay. As we dare to rise and lead the way, we're coming home, we're coming home. We're coming home to the spirit in our soul. We're coming home and the healing makes us whole. Like rivers running to the sea, we're coming home, coming home. As the day is woven into night, as the darkness lives within the light, as we are open vision to new sight, we're coming home, we're coming home. Thank you, everybody. And we conclude, we urge y'all to stay online or go away and come back and don't sign out, so we can have our fiscal meeting. Sandra Ruiz Harris is here and will be leading us through the new budget. Thank you, Susie Jerome, for singing beautifully, and Rady Roldán Figueroa. We hope you'll be back soon. We've had more treasures to show you. Okay, folks.